Who's European? Ancient DNA results. For those of you needing a quick answer to the question posed in the title, maybe you're doing a quick search, or on the run, or have an attention span issue, well, here's the answer, but stick around for the full video to learn more. According to current study and research in the fields of genetics, archaeology, and linguistics, Europeans are a mix of three waves of people from pre-recorded history stretching back around 45,000 years ago. All Europeans have hunter-gatherer, farmer, and Middle Age invader, also called Yamnaya, and the percentages of these three vary among Europeans, but as mentioned, all Europeans have this mix. Today we're going to talk about which peoples and groups Europeans are made up of going back in time before recorded history, because what many consider European today looked very different in the past. We will draw from published studies and current genetic and archaeological information and leave links with footnotes. Ancient DNA can be used to determine biological sex, uncover phenotypic traits like eye color or skin color, reveal kinship patterns, determine ancestry, reconstruct human migrations, provide insight into demography, uncover evidence of local adaptations, find evidence for past epidemics through pathogen DNA, study the spread and evolution of domesticated plants and animals as well. How is DNA used to match ancestors and trace the movement of people going back in time? Genetic material is stored in almost every cell in our bodies. DNA reproduces in our cells. They create exact copies of the original, and this is handed down through generations. These exact copies do, however, have errors introduced at times, and these mutations will be handed down to the next generation. Comparing DNA sequences from individuals, geneticists will look at the letters in these sequences, and every few 12 to 1300 letters may find these errors. Through this process, geneticists can build DNA trees for people, groups, individuals, and find common ancestors. Autosomal DNA tests that we see offered by a variety of companies today will use this science to determine your ancestry. Now, they can approximate ancestral origins, and the accuracy depends on people taking similar tests with which they can compare your DNA with. Now, they'll give you ethnicity breakdowns based on how similar you match with each population tested in a given country. Ancient DNA, however, is tested against bones of ancient people found in caves spread throughout Europe. These bones have been sequenced, and the DNA matches modern European populations. Here is my ancient DNA results as reference. Let us know what your results are in the comments below if you'd like to share. A little background, as an example, my own ancestors are from Cuba, Spain, and one second great-grandparent from Italy, but more likely Sicilian. So I'm 60% farmer, 32% hunter-gatherer, and 8% middle-aged invader. All Europeans share these three ancient peoples. Some with more farmer and others with more hunter-gatherer, and so on and so forth. Humans are similar to each other. 99.9% of human DNA is identical. The remainder of this DNA information is different because of mutations that happen in a random manner going back in time generation to generation. To learn more, check out our videos, Are We All Related? And How Many Ancestors Do We Have? Links are in the description notes below. David Reich, professor of genetics at Harvard Medical School. 98% of the ancestry of non-Africans is from Africa. The first skeletons of anatomically modern humans, people who look like us, appear in the African fossil record about 300,000 years ago, and then about 100,000 years ago, especially 50,000 years ago, explode out of Africa into different parts of Eurasia. Those parts of Eurasia were not empty of people. The first Neanderthals, who are archaic humans whose brains were as large as ours, made tools as complex as our ancestors did at the same time, were spread across Europe and Western Asia. Joshua M. Aki of the University of Washington said, "We know there are multiple dispersals out of Africa, but we can trace our ancestry back to a single one." The proportion of Neanderthal in non-Africans is about 2%, and even higher in East Asians than in Europeans, but virtually non-existent in Africans. The mixture of interbreeding between modern humans and Neanderthals is dated from 54,000 to 49,000 years ago. That mixture spread throughout Eurasia. Neanderthals mixed into the ancestors of non-Africans or today's European ancestors as they spread out of Africa then. David Reich, professor of genetics. The population which people think of as white simply didn't exist 10,000 years ago. Europeans as we know them today came to be because of population shifts in our past and are more recent than previously thought according to current understanding in science, around 10,000 years ago. Today, people in Eurasia are genetically similar to one another. People from Eurasia, Europeans, places like England compared to Iran, are genetically considered broadly part of the same group with small differences according to researchers. We will leave a link to lectures in the description if you'd like to do further research. From National Geographic, who are Europeans? Europeans living today in whatever country are a varying mix of ancient bloodlines hailing from Africa, the Middle East, and the Russian steppe. The evidence comes from archaeological artifacts, from the analysis of ancient teeth and bones, and from linguistics, but above all it comes from the new field of paleogenetics. There were three major waves of people that contributed to the current modern population of Europe. About 45,000 years ago, those first modern humans ventured into Europe, having made their way up through the Middle East. Their own DNA suggests that they had dark skin and perhaps light eyes. Those humans mixed with Neanderthals. These first Europeans were hunter-gatherers. From FamilyTreeDNA.com. Current-day northern European populations and the first hunter-gatherers in Europe, the signal of genetic sharing between present-day populations and early hunter-gatherers, however, begins to become fainter as one moves further south in Europe. The hunter-gatherer subsistence strategy dominated the landscape of the European continent for thousands of years until the populations that relied on farming and animal husbandry migrated into the area during the middle to late Neolithic era around 8,000 to 7,000 years ago. The second wave of people were farmers that replaced the hunter-gatherers by absorbing them into their population. Roughly 8,000 to 7,000 years ago, after the last glaciation period, Ice Age, modern human farming populations began migrating into the European continent from the Near East. This migration marked the beginning of the Neolithic era in Europe. Farming communities are believed to have migrated into the European continent via routes along Anatolia, thereby following the temperate weather patterns of the Mediterranean. These farming groups are known to have populated areas that span from modern-day Hungary, Germany, and west into Spain. Remains of the unique pottery styles and burial practices for these farming communities are found within these regions and can be attributed in part to artisans from the funnel beaker and linear pottery cultures. Third wave population. On what are now the steppes of southern Russia and eastern Ukraine, a group of nomads called the Yamnaya, some of the first people in the world to ride horses, had mastered the wheel and were building wagons and following herds of cattle across the grasslands. They built few permanent settlements, but they buried their most prominent men with bronze and silver ornaments in mighty grave mounds that still dot the steppes. Around 2800 BC, the Yamnaya began moving west. Yamnaya DNA spread as far west as the British Isles. Hardly any farmers from the previous wave of people in Britain, Germany, and other places remained. Instead, we see a 70 to 100% population replacement. All Europeans today are a mix. The genetic recipe for a typical European would be roughly equal parts Yamnaya and Anatolian farmer, with a much smaller dollop of African hunter-gatherer. But the average conceals large regional variations, more eastern cowboy genes in Scandinavia, more farmer ones in Spain, Italy, and significant chunks of hunter-gatherer DNA in the Baltics and Eastern Europe. This genetic mixture of hunter-gatherer, farmers, and herders is what makes up modern Europeans, and this happened 4,000 to 5,000 years ago. This is the going consensus with research and study currently. I hope you found the information useful. Check out the other videos in this series, and I'll catch you next time.